Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maddie, and if you're new here, I changed my hair. I am no longer a brunette. I am officially a full-on redhead. Wow, this is crazy. It's taking a while to grow on me, but I really like it. So today's video is not going to be the most fun because I am going to be sharing with you my grief story, and then at the end I'm also going to give you some book recommendations that focus on grief. When this video goes up, it will be the 2nd year anniversary of my dad's death. So I'm going to specifically be focusing on my grief and bereavement of the passing of my father. I'm going to try and keep it brief, and I'm going to try not to cry, but we'll see. Also, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I feel like grief definitely fits with this month. Anyway, if you don't want to stick around for my grief story, you can just skip to the end. I'll put a timestamp in the description for you to jump ahead to the book recommendations. And I'm just going to get right into it. I don't really know how to start this. I'm not uncomfortable, really, just unsure of what to say. I've always been very close with my family, and I took a big step after graduating high school because I moved to Missouri. I left my family behind and I went to a university in the state of Missouri, whereas I grew up in Alabama. It was at the end of my freshman year when I received a phone call from my mom telling me that my dad had died in an accident. It was very difficult, to say the least, because I mean that kind of information is never going to be easy, much less hearing it over the phone. Obviously I was in shock. There was a brief time when I didn't want to believe it was true, but I knew that my mom wouldn't really lie to me like that, and that what she's saying was true. And I mean, it just takes a while to process that kind of information because, like I said, I've always been close with my family, and I felt really guilty for moving to Missouri and leaving my family behind in the first place, because it was really hard on all of us. I only got to see them on Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, and spring break. And so the last time I saw my dad was a couple months previous during spring break, and I only got to see him for like a few hours while I was home. And so I felt really guilty about that because, like, I didn't savor that time that I had with him because I didn't know that it was going to be the last time. Anyway, so my dad was riding his motorcycle on a curvy road in the middle of nowhere, and we don't know what happened, but somehow he lost control or wasn't paying attention, or we don't really know, but he went around a curve and then went into the oncoming traffic lane and went straight on into a car. And without getting into details, it's not pretty what happened. There was just, I mean, he was already gone. So, there was nothing that they could do. And my mom called me a couple hours later, and it was just surreal. And my university that I went to, my college, was very kind and supportive, and all of my friends came into my apartment and just sat there with me, and my director and his wife actually came just like a minute or two after my mom had called me because they were already on their way, and they just came and sat with me in my apartment. And my college actually paid for my flight home as well as a friend to come with me. And so I was super grateful for that because they didn't want me to fly alone, which was just a blessing to have someone there with me. And I stayed home for 2 weeks, and then unfortunately I had to go back to Missouri because I had already made a commitment to stay there over the summer, and I had an internship, and I had so many cool opportunities that were happening that summer that I had already committed to. And I didn't want to give that up. I didn't want to let my dad's death just completely derail my life any more than it had to. I didn't want to give up on my dreams. I didn't want to give up on the things that I loved just because I lost him. And so it was very important for me to continue to live life normal, continue to live life as I was before the phone call. I had a very good support system there, and life was okay. And that summer I was doing pretty good. I think I was very much suppressing my emotions because I didn't want those emotions to affect my day-to-day life. So I actually went a couple months of not grieving. I lived life as I always lived it, and I didn't really acknowledge the pain I was feeling. I didn't really acknowledge, like, hey, my dad is gone. And I knew that he was. I wasn't in denial. I just didn't want to focus on it because I knew that once I started focusing on it, I wouldn't be able to live anymore. Like, I wouldn't be able to live normally. So I just didn't really acknowledge it, which was not the best way to grieve. And after so long, those emotions just built up and built up, and I was just not in a good place. And my university actually not forced me. They didn't force me to go to counseling, but they pretty much did. It was like highly suggested that I go to counseling because my roommates were worried about me. They were all worried about me. So I went to counseling, and I didn't want to. I mean, if you've never been to counseling before, it can be a really scary and vulnerable moment. It's definitely like a fear of the unknown. So I didn't want to go, but I ended up going because I pretty much had to. And that is really when my grieving process actually began, because at that point I was acknowledging my feelings, and I had to put a name to each emotion that I was feeling in order to, like, acknowledge it and get better, because you can't fix something that you don't know is there. And that whole school year, my whole sophomore year, it was very rough. And honestly, unless I was close to someone, unless I was good friends with them, I didn't talk about it with anyone. So just like my acquaintances, my classmates, my teachers, none of them really knew, and if they knew, they had heard from somebody else, not from me. So it wasn't something that I talked about, and it wasn't something that my peers were able to notice, because, like, I was getting depressed, but my schedule was so busy that I didn't allow myself to be in that state. Like, I forced myself to do things anyway because I had to. I was in an intense leadership training program. I was getting my degree in leadership, my associate's degree, and so it was intense. It was a long time. It was a long journey, and I started having some symptoms of insomnia, and I had the best roommate I could have ever asked for. And if you've been watching my videos for a while, you may know my best friend Christina. She was actually my roommate during that time, and she would just sit up with me till the early hours of the morning and just sit there with me while I cried, or just, like, she didn't want me to be alone, and she would just sit there with me and be whoever I needed her to be. If I needed a shoulder to cry on, she was my shoulder to cry on. If I needed someone to talk to, she was my person to talk to. If I just needed to sit in silence, she would sit in silence with me. And honestly, like, I can't even describe to you how much that meant to me, how much it still means to me. I don't know where I would be without her, and I'm just so blessed to have her in my life. But then I graduated because it was only a 2-year degree, and I originally, before my dad passed away, I had originally planned to stay in Missouri, and those plans changed because at that point I was ready to be home with my family, and I just wanted a break from everything. I wanted time to slow down and really grieve with my family the way that it was kind of, I wasn't able to, like it was kind of stolen from me really. Because while I did have a choice in going back to school or staying at home, it wasn't really a choice. I had to get my degree, I had to continue on with my life. So in a way it felt like those moments with my family were taken from me, and I needed to spend time with them, and we needed to grieve together. I was very nervous about moving home because in Missouri I wasn't surrounded by the memories of my dad, but at home I definitely am. I was fine for like the first month, but then I got very depressed, and I mean there's no other words to describe it besides severe depression. And on top of that, just through previous life experiences, I have had symptoms of PTSD for many years, since I was like 11 years old. And once I moved back home after my dad passed away, those symptoms started coming back. And I'm a very paranoid person because I have had a lot of bad things happen in my life. Like, my life has been great. I love my life, and I have been very fortunate, very blessed. But I mean, no life is perfect, and there definitely have been things that have happened to me that have just kind of like ripped the ground underneath my feet, so to speak. So I'm a very paranoid person. I'm always wondering when the next person is going to die. I'm always worried if someone's going to break into my house. I'm always worried if someone's going to come into my room and sexually abuse me. So I have a lot of things that I'm paranoid about, and at night I would just hear different noises, or my thoughts would just start racing and they wouldn't slow down, and I would just lay there for hours not able to sleep. And the summer was just a really bad time for me, honestly, because also like I didn't have Christina with me, and so far up to that point Christina had been with me, and she was the one that helped me through all of that. And so when I moved home, I didn't have anyone, so it definitely made it worse. Once you've been so long relying on someone else, it's hard to rely on yourself. It's hard to use your own coping skills. It's hard to calm yourself down. It's hard to stop your own paranoid thoughts. It's hard to comfort yourself when you've relied on another person to comfort you for so long. And just for several months, that was my journey of learning how to do things on my own, learning how to comfort myself, not relying on another person. And that's around the time I started BookTube. I was starting to get better. I am on medications now for my depression and for my insomnia. So I was starting to get better, and I wanted to do something that I've always wanted to do. So I started my book blog. And when I started my book blog, my friend who is a blogger who encouraged me to start the blog, she was like, why don't you just go ahead and do a BookTube channel? Why can't you do both? I was like, I don't want to start a YouTube channel. I don't want to get in front of a camera and make videos and post them online for the world to see. Like, that's not me. I don't want to do that. And she just kept encouraging me, and she was basically like, you're going to do it. And so I did. I started my BookTube channel, and I believe it's in like the end of October, and I love it. I love making videos. And it does make me nervous that people in my real life may actually see these videos, and it's fine if they do. It just, people don't, it's not something that I tell people. Not that I'm embarrassed about it, it's just, it makes me uncomfortable to be like, hey, you should go watch my YouTube channel. It's great. It just makes me uncomfortable, so people don't really know about it in my real life besides my close friends and family. But all that to say that I have been better for several months now. And I don't know if any of that can be attributed to book 2, but I know it has a lot to do with reading, because for those 2 years I was at school, I didn't really read. One, because I didn't have time, but two, because I just didn't feel like it. And I've mentioned this before on my channel, but like, when I read something, I want to be able to find myself in the story. I want to be able to relate to it in some type of way. And because I was grieving so strongly, because I was in so much pain, I didn't want to read a book unless I found those same feelings in a character. And there's not that many out there. So I pretty much stopped reading. There were plenty of books that I wanted to read, but when I would pick them up and try to read them, I just couldn't connect. And I would just set them down, and I was in such a huge slump. Now that I'm reading again, I'm much better. I definitely still have phases of depression. I definitely still deal with insomnia. Not all the time. I go through phases. Sometimes I'm doing really well and I'm sleeping great and I'm happy and no depressive symptoms, and then some days it just flips like a switch. So I definitely still struggle with that from time to time, but I'm doing so much better, and I love to be able to share my story with people, because if you're struggling with similar things, or if you're just struggling in general, like, I want you to know that life's not perfect, but it does get better. When something happens like that in your life that just rips the ground out from underneath you, things don't stay that way. Things get better, and it may feel like it's never going to end, but it does get better. And I am religious. I am a Christian, and I know that so much of my resilience and my good days are contributed to that. But anyway, that's why I wanted to make this video. And if you stuck around and listened to this whole entire thing, thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for listening. And I hope it was an encouragement to you. I hope you were able to relate to it in some type of way. I hope that it benefits at least one person. My camera died, so the angle is probably different, but without further ado, I'm now going to be recommending to you some books that talk about grief or focus on grief. Most of these I read after my dad passed away, because those were the types of books that I was craving. If I read anything at all, I read books like these. Or some of these books I read previous to my dad's passing, but I have since reread them. And I know I talked entirely too long, so I'm going to try and make this short. First, I have The Truth About Forever by Sarah Dessen. This follows a teenage girl whose dad recently passed away, and she goes out on a whim and starts a new job, and she befriends her coworkers, and it's just a crazy, wild, fun ride, and it's also a romance, and there's also some more deeper issues to this story as well, but that is the main premise of the story, and it also focuses a lot on her grief. Next, I have If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan, and I don't want to say anything beyond this book deals with grief, because it will completely ruin the story for you. I highly recommend not looking up descriptions or synopsi, whatever it is, of this book, because it will probably spoil you. I don't know why there are spoilers in this description, but there are, so I recommend not looking those up. But trust me on this one, this is fantastic. I love this book so much. Next, I have The Skies Everywhere by Jane D. Nelson, and this is a story about a teenage girl whose teenage sister unexpectedly passed away, I believe from like a heart attack or something strange like that for a young girl. The main character is very much grieving her sister's unexpected death, and it's also a romance, which I liked. This isn't the best book, but I enjoyed the grief aspect. So if you're looking for a book specifically that talks about grief, I do recommend this one. Next, I have The Lies About Truth by Courtney Stevens. This is a book about a teenage girl who was in a car accident with her best friend, and her best friend passed away. And then it's all about her grief story, I think there's PTSD in this. I don't really remember because it's been so long since I've read it. but it is a romance between her and her best friend's brother. Next, I have Amy Rogers' Epic Detour by Morgan Matson. I love this book so much. I felt like the grief aspect was so relatable because the main character's dad passed away in an accident, and this is her grief story, her family's grief story, and it's also a cute, fun road trip book, so it was like the best of both worlds for me. I highly recommend this book. Next, I have Second Chance Summer by Morgan Matson. This is one that I read a few months before my dad passed away, actually. And this is a story about a girl whose dad is dying of cancer, and her family want to spend the last summer that they have all together at their summer lake house. It's also a romance, and it's a cutesy summery book as well. So if you're looking again for the best of both worlds, I highly recommend this one. Next, I have The Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy by Jenny Han. This is the Walmart bind-up edition, and this book is actually special to me because my dad bought this for me. And this is very much a cute, summery, contemporary story with a love triangle with these two brothers, but there is a character death that happens in the series that completely changes the storyline, and it very much affects all of the other characters, and they deal with their grief differently, and they're all struggling with what has happened, and I really enjoyed that, and I love this trilogy. If you have not read it, I do highly recommend it if you like YA contemporary. Next, I have I Was Here by Gail Foreman. This is a story about a teenage girl whose best friend recently passed away to suicide, and she does not believe that her best friend actually committed suicide or that there's something fishy about the situation because she had no idea that anything was going on with her best friend's mental health. She thought everything was fine and that she was happy, and so she is very suspicious of her best friend's death, and she goes on a journey to figure out what really happened, and I really enjoyed this one. Next, I have If I Stay by Gail Foreman. This is, actually I don't want to say because it's a spoiler. Basically, there's a lot of death in this book, and the main character is like having an out-of-body experience, and she is watching everything that is going on around her, and then there's also a lot of scenes of her reminiscing of the past. Basically, this book is about her trying to figure out if she wants to stay or if she wants to die, because it's her decision if she wants to wake out of a coma or not. Next, I have a book that I am currently reading, but I wanted to go ahead and recommend it to you. The Chaos of Standing Still by Jessica Brody. I am only a few chapters into this book, but so far the grief representation is on point, and I am really enjoying it, but it's so relatable that reading it during this time close to my dad's death anniversary, I was starting to get triggered by it, so I had to put it down, and I really wanted to finish it before I recorded this video, but I'm going to go ahead and recommend it to you because the grief aspect is very well done, and I have no idea about the rest of the story, but I do know that the grief representation is good. And lastly, I cannot make this video without mentioning Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, but really the whole series, but mainly the third book, Heir of Fire, is the one that speaks to me the most. The main character, Selena, has so much unresolved grief, so much pain in her past that she very much dissociates herself from, and I really relate to that on a very real level. Because of my grief and because of my connection to the main character, this has, I think it's become my favorite series of all time, and I know some people don't like this series at all, which is totally okay, but I can only speak for my feelings and my own thoughts about this series, and I love it so much. If you don't know, this is a fantasy series, and it follows a teenage assassin, female assassin, and the first book is a mild fantasy, and she is in a competition to become the king's champion and be his personal assassin. However, the rest of the series continues to get deeper into the fantasy elements and the world gets so much larger and it turns into this huge epic fantasy series. I love this series, highly recommend it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more bookish content by me. I hope you all have a wonderful day and I will see you in my next video. Bye.